Hey, you guys. What we're going to be discussing today is essentially Jeffersonian democracy. If you remember, part of where we left off in the last unit was with the election of 1800. So, of course, this was a transition of power, right? The so-called bloodless revolution, where they transitioned over from the Federalist Party to the Democratic Republican. And so, in this election, if you remember, it was a pretty dirty election, very contested, very, mudslinging, if you will, between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. At the end of the day, there was some confusion there as far as, who in from the Democrats was supposed to hold back their vote, and it ended up in a tie between um, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Now, from there, it went on to the House of Representatives, and which was mostly controlled by Federalists, which was ironic because they were going to be out of power. And so they now had to decide who of the two Democrats was going to become the next president of the United States. So this is where Alexander Hamilton, of course, comes in, and he still has, a lot of influence. And um, ultimately, he convinces the House of Representatives to go with Thomas Jefferson, um, and not Aaron Burr, because even though he disagreed with Thomas Jefferson in almost everything, and they didn't like each other very much, he still believed that that Jefferson was the better of two evils. When it comes to him and Aaron Burr, he didn't like both of them, but he didn't like Aaron Burr even more. Okay, so of course that's going to be another one of these major problems between Hamilton and Aaron Burr, which in a couple of years from this point is going to lead to them getting into a duel. Of course, Aaron Burr shooting and killing Alexander Hamilton. And so, one of the biggest consequences of this election of 1800 is not just that the Democrats are going to be now in power and the Federalists are out, but also the 12th Amendment, right? So the 12th Amendment basically is going to set aside the selection of the VP as a separate issue. So no longer will the person that has the most electoral votes be president and the one with the second most votes become the VP, like we saw, previously, which is how in 1796 you got Adams and Jefferson as his VP. So no more of that. From now on, it's going to be just, parties essentially. Okay. So, anyways, that's where we left off last time. Today, we are going to look at Thomas Jefferson's presidency from the years 1800 to 1814. And so, our objectives for today are and we're going to break them up into pieces. So make sure that you scroll down to the next lectures after this. But first, we're going to explain how Jefferson's presidency both defined and contradicted his political philosophy. So lots of, I don't want to say hypocrisy, but it's definitely somebody that is willing to be flexible, right, in terms of his interpretation of the U.S. Constitution when it suits him. And so we'll talk about several examples of his duality. The other thing we're going to talk about today is understanding how the Louisiana Purchase came about. And so we'll talk about that and its consequences. We'll also look at the reasons for and the results of the War of 1812. But first, let's just sort of talk a little bit about who Thomas Jefferson was. I mean, we've been talking about him extensively, but there's a couple of things that I want to be, crystal clear about, right, in terms of that duality, right, the enigma that is Thomas Jefferson. And the first thing here, of course, is that while he's penning, he's writing the Declaration of Independence. Remember, he is the main architect of that, talking about how, all men are created equal, endowed by their creators with this inalienable rights. Well, which men? All men? But, he was a slave owner, of course. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Jefferson did believe that slavery was a bad deal for the nation, but he still had them, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about his role as a slave owner. The other thing too that we want to establish about Thomas Jefferson is, we talked about this in the last unit, right? About the differences between the Democrats or the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, is that Democratic Republicans like Jefferson wanted a nation of farmers, believed in the virtue of the yeoman farmer, and believed that the government should be working in the interests of the agrarian nation. However, during his presidency, we're going to talk about how his policies actually led to the opposite. So increased manufacturing, more people becoming wage earners rather than virtuous landowners. So we're going to talk about that as well. And he also believed in the strict interpretation of the Constitution. Remember that they were in large part anti-federalist, right? They believed that the state should retain most of the power. However, as president, this is one of those examples where he's going to shift his position on that. He is going to go ahead and move forward with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon, even though the Constitution didn't say that he could do that. So again, that's another example of his duality. Lastly, he claimed to champion small government, and part of it he's going to try to do in the beginning of his presidency, but the results of this and his policies, it's going to result in even more federal power, the expansion of government power, more than any of what the Federalists would have done or did until he became president. So for more on this, I want you to go ahead and click on the next little video that's after this. It's a video on the duality of Thomas Jefferson, and then I'll see you back in a minute, okay?